Okay, this is the Daf Yomi for Monday, February 17th, 2025. We're in Sanhedrin 62. Okay, so if he did not accept the person upon himself... Okay, so backing up to the end of 61, it says, this case must also be clarified. If he accepted that a person upon himself as a god, he is an intentional transgressor, and he is liable to receive the death penalty and not to bring an offering. Okay, so now into 62. And if he did not accept that person upon himself as a god, but rather bowed to the statue in order to honor the person, that is, the king, what he did is nothing. Rather, is the Baraita not referring to a case where the high priest unwittingly worshipped an idol due to love or due to fear of someone? This proves that this is also considered idol worship. And Rava could have said to you in response, no, the Baraita is not referring to this case, but to a case where the high priest says to himself that idol worship is permitted. The Gemara challenges, if the Baraita is referring to a case where the high priest says to himself that idol worship is permitted, this is a case of a lapse of awareness concerning the fundamental halakha of idol worship, in which case the rabbis concede that the high priest is obligated to bring an offering. Therefore, what is the difference between the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and that of the sages? The Gemara answers, it is a case where he says to himself that idol worship is entirely permitted, whereas the case of a lapse of awareness, in which the rabbis concede to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, is a case of upholding part of the prohibition and negating another part. So that is a case where the high priest recognizes that idol worship is prohibited, but mistakenly assumes that certain idolatrous activities are permitted. So Rabbi Zakkai taught the following Baraita before Rabbi Yochanan. So if one sacrificed an animal as an idolatrous offering and burned incense as an idolatrous offering and poured a libation to an idol and bowed to an idol, all in the course of one lapse of awareness, forgetting that these actions were prohibited, he is obligated to bring only one sin offering. He is not obligated to bring an offering for each and every act of idol worship. So Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Go out and teach it outside. That is, such a Baraita must not be taught in the study hall, as the halakha is that one is obligated to bring an offering for each and every act of idol worship. Rabbi Abba says, that which Rabbi Zakkai says is subject to a ta'anic dispute between Rabbi Yoshi and Rabbi Natan, as it is taught in a Baraita. The prohibition against kindling a fire on the Sabbath was singled out from the general category of labor prohibited on the Sabbath, and it is written explicitly in the Torah in the verse, you shall not kindle fire in all your dwelling places on the day of the Sabbath, Exodus 35, verse 3. So this was done to teach that the prohibition against kindling a fire on the Sabbath is unlike other prohibited labors, as it is an ordinary prohibition for which one is not liable to be killed by stoning. This is the statement of Rabbi Yoshi. And Rabbi Natan says, kindling a fire is like any other labor prohibited on the Sabbath. And it was singled out to divide the prohibited labors of Shabbat. So, in other words, by stating one prohibited labor separately, the Torah teaches that each labor performed on Shabbat constitutes its own separate prohibition. Consequently, one who unwittingly violates several categories of labor is obligated to bring a sin offering for each and every act of prohibited labor. So Rabbi Abba concludes, according to the one who says that all the labors that are prohibited on Shabbat, kindling a fire on Shabbat, was singled out to be mentioned in the Torah to teach that it is an ordinary prohibition, then bowing in the category of idol worship, which is mentioned explicitly in the verse, you shall not bow to them nor worship them, Exodus 20, verse 5, was also singled out to teach that it is an ordinary prohibition, which is not punishable by stoning. Whereas, according to the one who says that kindling a fire was singled out to divide the prohibited labors of Shabbat, bowing was also singled out to divide the rites of idol worship, and to teach that one who unwittingly performs several forms of idol worship is obligated to bring a sin offering for each and every act of idol worship. Therefore, the Baraita taught by Rabbi Zakkai, which states that such a person is obligated to bring only one sin offering, is in accordance with the former opinion, that is the opinion of Rabbi Yoshi. Rav Yosef objects to this. Perhaps Rabbi Yoshi says there, with regard to the halachot of Shabbat, that kindling a fire was singled out to teach that it is an ordinary prohibition only because he derives the division of labors on Shabbat, that is, one is obligated to bring an offering for each category of labor that he violated, from a different verse, namely, quote, from one of them, Leviticus 4, verse 2. As it is taught in Baraita, that Rabbi Yoshi says with regard to the verse, if anyone shall sin through error in any of the things which the Lord has commanded not to be done, and performs from one of them, Leviticus 4, verse 2, that there are times when one is liable to bring a sin offering for all of his transgressions together, and there are times when one is liable to bring a sin offering for each and every transgression. Rabbi Yochanan says, "What is the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Yoshi? As it is written, and performs from one of them." And Rabbi Yoshi interprets the verse as follows. Sorry, that was a quote. And performs from one of them. And Rabbi Yoshi interprets the verse as follows. The word one is qualified as the verse states, quote, from one. Likewise, the word them is qualified as the verse states, quote, of them. Rabbi Yoshi derives that there are cases of one transgression that with regard to punishment is them, that is many, and there are cases of them, that is several transgressions, that with regard to punishment are one. Rabbi Yonatan delineates the implementation of this principle with regard to the halachot of Shabbat. That's quote. One, complete violation is a case where one wrote a whole word as he intended, such as the name Shimon. The term, quote, from one is referring to a case where one performed only part of a complete act of labor, that is, he wrote only some of the letters of a word, such as Shin, Mem, from the name Shimon. These two letters spell the word Shem. In such a case, one is obligated to bring an offering for transgressing of writing two letters, Shin and Mem, even though he did not complete his intended act of writing the entire name of Shimon. So just like on Shabbat, you're not supposed to write. So they're talking about the difference between writing like one letter or two letters like Shin Mem, right? So Shin Mem spells a word, a complete word. Okay, so continuing. Rabbi Yochanan continues, quote, them is referring to the primary category of labor. The term, quote, of them includes the subcategories of labor. The cases of one transgression that with regard to punishment is them, that is, it is counted as many transgressions, are those involving intention, that is, awareness on the part of the transgressor that it was Shabbat, and unawareness on the part of the transgressor that the acts of labor that he performed are prohibited on Shabbat. So one who transgresses in this way is obligated to bring a sin offering for each and every category of labor that he engages in. The cases of them, several transgressions, that with regard to punishment are one, are those involving unawareness on the part of the transgressor that it was Shabbat, and intention, or awareness, that the acts of labor that he was performing are prohibited on Shabbat. One who transgresses in this way is obligated to bring only one sin offering. Rav Yosef concludes his objection to Rabbi Abba's comparison between the status of the prohibition against kindling a fire on Shabbat and the status of the prohibition against bowing to an idol. The fact that Rabbi Yoshi derives the kindling of a fire on Shabbat as not punishable by death can be attributed to the fact that he derives from a different verse. The one who violates several categories of labor is obligated to bring a sin offering for each and every category of labor that he engages in. But here, with regard to idol worship, where he does not derive the division of labors, the division of categories of idol worship from another place, perhaps everyone agrees that bowing was singled out to divide the prohibition of idol worship into different categories of bowing to an idol is punishable by death, just like other forms of worship. Okay, the Gemara asks, according to both opinions, that of Rav Abba and that of Rav Yosef, why not derive the division of labors with regard to idol worship too from the same verse from which Rabbi Yossi derives the division of labors with regard to Shabbat, namely, from the verse, quote, one of them. Since this verse is not referring to the halachot of Shabbat in particular, it can be interpreted with regard to idol worship in the same manner that it is interpreted with regard to Shabbat. So the word one is referring to one complete prohibited act of worship, such as sacrificing an animal as an idolatrous offering. The term from one is referring to one who performs part of an act of worship. That is, one who did not finish slaughtering the offering, as he severed only one of the organs, or the windpipe, the gullet, that must be severed in ritual slaughter. So the word them is referring to the primary categories of idol worship that are derived from the manner in which God is worshipped in the temple, namely sacrificing an animal as an offering, burning incense, pouring a libation, and bowing. The term, quote, of them is referring to the subcategories of idol worship. One who broke a stick before an idol that is worshipped in such a manner, breaking a stick is a subcategory of sacrificing, as an animal's neck is broken when it is slaughtered. So, the principle of one transgression that with regard to punishment is them, that is, many can be applied to a case of intention, that is awareness on the part of the transgressor that idol worship is prohibited, and unawareness that the particular rites of worship that he was performing are prohibited. The principle of them, several transgressions that with regard to punishment are one, can be applied to the case of unawareness with regard to the prohibition of idol worship. the transgressor was unaware that idol worship is prohibited, or that he was worshiping an idol, and intention, that is awareness, that the rites that he was performing are prohibited. The Gemara responds to the suggestion that the division of categories of idol worship can be derived from this verse. What are the circumstances of unawareness with regard to idol worship? If the transgressor thought that a certain building was a synagogue and bowed to it, and then he realized that it is a house of idol worship, he is certainly exempt, as his heart was directed toward heaven. Rather, it must be a case where the transgressor saw a statue, andarta is the word, a statue of a person, and bowed to it. This case must also be clarified. If he accepted that person upon himself as a god, he is an intentional transgressor and is liable to receive the death penalty, not to bring an offering. If he did not accept him upon himself as a god, but rather bowed to the statue in order to honor the person, what he did is nothing. Rather, it is clearly a case where one worshipped an idol due to love or due to fear of someone, and he was unaware that this is prohibited. This works out well according to Abaye, who says that one who engages in idol worship due to love or fear is liable. Accordingly, one who does so unwittingly must bring an offering, but according to Rava, who says that one who does so is exempt, what can be said? Rather, according to Rava, unawareness with regard to idol worship can be explained as referring to a case where the transgressor says to himself that idol worship is permitted in general. So if so, one can resolve the dilemma that Rava raised before Rav Nachman. What is the halacha if one who violated Shabbat has a lapse of awareness of both this, that is, that it was Shabbat, and that the particular labor that he performed is prohibited? Rava's dilemma has been left unresolved. If the phrase "and performs from one of them," end of quote, is interpreted as referring to a case where one engages in idol worship, thinking that it is permitted to do so, one can resolve that the transgressor is obligated to bring only one sin offering for all of his acts of idol worship. According to this interpretation of the verse, the fact that Rava's dilemma had been left unresolved therefore serves as a challenge to this interpretation. The Gemara refutes this challenge. This is not difficult. Indeed, resolve the dilemma from here. The Gemara asks, but can you interpret these verses, namely, quote, "and performs from one of them," end of quote, with regard to idol worship at all? As here in Leviticus chapter 4, where this verse is written stating that if he sinned unwittingly, he brings a bull as a sin offering, and with regard to a king who sinned unwittingly, it is stated that he brings a goat as a sin offering, and with regard to an ordinary individual, it is stated that he brings a female lamb or a female goat. Whereas with regard to idol worship, we learned in a Braita, with regard to idol worship, we learned in a Braita, 61b, and they agree that a high priest who unwittingly engages in idol worship brings a female goat as a sin offering, as does an ordinary individual. Clearly then, the halachot of unwitting idol worship are derived from a different source, that is Numbers chapter 15. The Gemara concludes, and there is nothing more to be discussed. The suggestion to derive a division of categories with regard to idol worship from the phrase in the verse, quote, "and performs from one of them," end quote, is groundless, and Rav Yosef's objection to Rabbi Abba's opinion is justified. When Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said, "This is the Braita that Rabbi Zakkai taught before Rabbi Yochanan. There is a stringency with regard to Shabbat, vis-a-vis other mitzvot, and consequently there is a stringency with regard to other mitzvot, vis-a-vis Shabbat. There is a stringency with regard to Shabbat as with regard to Shabbat. If one permitted two distinct acts of labor and one lapse of awareness, he is obligated to bring a sin offering for each and every act, which is not so with regard to other mitzvot. Conversely, there is a stringency with regard to other mitzvot as with regard to other mitzvot. If one sinned unwittingly, without intent, to perform the act of the transgression at all, he is nevertheless obligated to bring an offering, which is not so with regard to Shabbat." The Gemara examines this Braita in detail. The Master said, "There is a stringency with regard to Shabbat, as with regard to Shabbat. If one performed two distinct acts of labor and one lapse of awareness, he is obligated to bring a sin offering for each act. What are the circumstances? If we say that he unwittingly performed acts of reaping and grinding on Shabbat, the corresponding situation with regard to other mitzvot is a case where one unwittingly consumed forbidden fat and blood. If so, there is no difference between Shabbat and other mitzvot. Here, one is obligated to bring two sin offerings, and there, one is obligated to bring two sin offerings." Rather, what are the circumstances with regard to other mitzvot? Where one is obligated to bring only one sin offering, one is obligated in a case where he consumed forbidden fat and again consumed forbidden fat within one lapse of awareness. The corresponding situation with regard to Shabbat is a case where one performed an act of reaping and performed another act of reaping within one lapse of awareness. In that case, too, there is no difference between Shabbat and other mitzvot. Here, one is obligated to bring one sin offering, and there, one is obligated to bring one sin offering. The Gemara comments, and that is the reason that Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Zakkai, go out and teach this Baraita outside. It is not worthy of being taught in the study hall. The Gemara asks, what is the difficulty that caused Rabbi Yochanan to disregard the Baraita? Actually, perhaps I will say to you that the Baraita is referring to a case where one performed acts of reaping and grinding on Shabbat, and when the Baraita states, which is not so with regard to other mitzvot, it is not referring to all mitzvot in general. Rather, we arrive at the halacha of idol worship in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Ami. As Rabbi Ami says, if one sacrificed an animal as an idolatrous offering and burned incense and poured a libation, all in the course of one lapse of awareness, he is obligated to bring only one sin offering. The Gemara answers, the Baraita cannot be interpreted as referring to idol worship, as it teaches in the last clause. There is a stringency with regard to other mitzvot, as with regard to other mitzvot. If one sinned unwittingly, without the intent to perform the act at all, he is nevertheless obligated to bring an offering. The Gemara explains why this cannot be referring to idol worship. What are the circumstances of one who unwittingly transgresses the prohibition of idol worship without the intent to perform the act? If he thought that a house of worship was a synagogue and bowed to it, he is certainly exempt, as his heart was directed toward heaven. Rather, it must be a case where the transgressor saw the statue of a person and bowed to it. If he accepted that person upon himself as a god, he is an intentional transgressor and is liable to receive the death penalty, not to bring an offering. And if he did not accept upon himself as a god, what he did is nothing. Rather, the Baraita must be referring to a case where one worshipped an idol due to love or due to fear of a person. He was unaware that this is prohibited. This works out well according to Abaye, who says that one who engages in idol worship due to love or fear is liable. Accordingly, one who does so unwittingly must bring an offering. But according to Rava, who says that one who does so is exempt, what can be said? Rather, the Baraita must be referring to a case where the transgressor says to himself that idol worship is permitted in general. Accordingly, the statement in the Baraita, which is not so in the halachot of Shabbat, is referring to one who was under the impression that performing labor on Shabbat is permitted. One who performs prohibited labor under those circumstances is completely exempt, while one who transgresses under those circumstances with regard to idol worship, one is obligated to bring a sin offering. This interpretation of the Baraita is difficult, as Rava asked Rav Nachman about the halacha in the case where one violated Shabbat during the lapse of awareness of both this, that it was Shabbat, and that the particular labor that he performed is prohibited on Shabbat. And Rava's question was only with regard to whether to deem the person obligated to bring one sin offering or whether to deem him obligated to bring two. There is no one who says that such a person is entirely exempt in accordance with this interpretation of the Baraita. Therefore, the Baraita cannot be referring to idol worship. The Gemara challenges this conclusion. What is the difficulty in interpreting the Baraita as referring to idol worship? Actually, perhaps I will say to you that the first clause of the Baraita is referring to the contrast between Shabbat and idol worship, and the last clause is referring to the contrast between Shabbat and other mitzvot. So in the halacha of one who transgressed other mitzvot unwittingly, without intent to perform the act, is referring to a case where one has forbidden fat in his mouth and thinks it is spittle, and he swallows it. In that case, he must bring an offering for his transgression, which is not so with regard to the halachot of Shabbat, where in a parallel case, one would be exempt. As, for example, one who intended to lift a plant that was detached from the ground and mistakenly severed a plant still attached to the ground is exempt. One is not liable for an unintentional act of labor on Shabbat. And this distinction is in accordance with the statement of Rav Nachman, says that Shmuel says, as he says, one who acts unawares with forbidden fats and with those with whom sexual relations are forbidden, that is, one who accidentally consumed forbidden fat or engaged in forbidden relations without intending to perform the act at all, Yevamot 54a is a reference there, is obligated to bring a sin offering since he derived pleasure from the transgression. But one who acts unawares on Shabbat, performing forbidden labor, is exempt, as the Torah forbids only planned labor. Since the Baraita can be explained in this manner, the Gemara explains why Rabbi Yochanan rejected it anyway. Rabbi Yochanan conforms to his standard line of reasoning in that he does not interpret the first clause of a Baraita with one explanation, and the last clause of the same Baraita with one other explanation. Rabbi Yochanan does not accept the premise that a Baraita can be referring to a different manner in each clause unless it states so explicitly. As Rabbi Yochanan says, whoever explains to me the Mishnah concerning a barrel, Bava Metzia 40b, in accordance with the opinion of one Tana, I will carry his clothes after him to the bathhouse. That is, I will attend him as his servant, although, that Mishnah can be explained by dividing it into two different opinions. I do not accept that type of explanation. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan does not accept the suggestion that the first clause of the Baraita here is referring to idol worship and the last clause is referring to other mitzvot. Okay. The Gemara discusses the matter itself, namely whether one who engages in several forms of idol worship in the same lapse of awareness brings more than one sin offering. And then it continues into tomorrow.